Hello, you creative genius, you happy Monday, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Prompt. In this series, over the past 7 episodes, not including yesterday's personal vlog entry, we have been reverse engineering the complete process. We took what we did in episode number 4, and we specifically devoted an episode to each of the 7 phases, and we're at the final one today, which is actually the very first one in our reverse engineering process. So what we're going to talk about today is the phase that happens, or that I sort of discovered should happen, I think, before you even begin story development. So if you haven't watched those other ones, if you're new here, please go back and watch those. Keep also in mind that this is episode number 22, I think. There's a reason that we didn't just start with 4 and then do the past 6. All of it is there to give you the context. And understanding the context of it is going to change your understanding of the details themselves. So with that said, that caveat, that if you're new here, this is not the place to start. But if you have been following along, so here, let's do a quick recap of what we've done. So first of all, if we think about the complete process, idea to story to screenplay to the deal, if we reverse engineer it, the end goal is to connect your work with a producer who's going to say yes and turn your screenplay or your story into a movie. So the final phase of that is figuring out how to connect with them, to hook them in, to pull them into your project, get them excited about it, and then over-deliver on whatever promises you're making or implying in your project. So in order to be able to do that, you need to know that your project is aligned with a producer in the first place. If you're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, you are going to be spamming people, you are going to be bothering people, you are out of alignment with people. So you need to make sure that your project is aligned with who you're sending it out to. Now, how do you do that? Well, you send your script out for notes and feedback, and you learn how to decipher and interpret and understand what notes you're getting when you're getting conflicting notes. How do you then apply that to your story? Not so that you can appease the notes, not so that you can tailor what you've written to them, but so that instead you can make sure that what you're trying to create is landing with the reader the way you want it to land with the reader. Make no mistake about it. If you get notes and feedback that conflicts with what you're trying to do or achieve, stick to your guns. Create the story that you want to create, but understand why the reader is interpreting what they're interpreting. That's how you're going to determine whether your project is aligned with someone. So how do you send your script out to get notes and feedback? Again, reverse engineering the process. You have to make sure that you send out a better caliber script. The higher the quality of script, the faster the screenplay, the more of a page turner it actually is, the more likely you're going to get people interested in reading your work. They're going to be able to go deeper into the work, and they're going to be able to give you a better caliber notes to ensure that you actually can create something that's viable. So you want to make sure that everything you send out there is a page turner. So you're going to be thinking about the read of the experience of the person actually reading the pages, actually turning those pages, what they're thinking about, what they're imagining ahead in your story, all that stuff. Now, in order to even do and think about that stuff, you have to have a solid story in the first place. So if we're reverse engineering, prior to that, we have to go through the rewrite process. We have to take your first draft and we have to turn it into a solid draft. We talked about in the strengthen episode, we talked about the 6 layers of the story. So from broad to narrow, if you can start with a big picture and you know what that big picture is, you figure out what the whole story is that expresses that big picture, you identify what the acts are that comprise that story, you then figure out the scenes that comprise the acts, you then identify the dialogue level and down to the beat by beat experience level of your story, and make sure that every single detail is serving the story itself. So when you have that idea for a movie and you get it onto the page, and it's a bit of a mess at the beginning, you can simply start from whatever it is and get it to whatever you need it to be. And you go systematically through that rewrite process. That way you won't get stuck and off in the land of chaos, right? Of rewriting 1,000 times and having no clue which way to go, because you'll have a very clear systematic way to get to your target. So before you can rewrite anything, you obviously need to write something. So the phase prior to the rewrite is the actual writing, the apply phase, where you take a story plan that you've created and you basically blast out the draft as quickly as you possibly can. And that's my suggestion anyway. Some people like to be laborious and take their time with it, but I really believe in tapping into the creative subconscious, the spark that you have, that sort of all that stuff that's working in the background. Let that stuff bubble up. The faster you can write, the less you think about it, the less control you try to impose on it, the more you're able to tap into some of the best ideas, which are hidden from your conscious focus. And they're sitting there in your subconscious focus, which is going to give you a better caliber story at the end of it. Now, before you can sit down and do that, well, not before, you can, but in my opinion, before you should, you want to develop your story. You want to find your idea, grow your idea into a story plan so that when you sit down and you let go and you go where you're going to go, you have guardrails keeping you on track so you don't sort of veer way off the mark. The story development phase is really that point, is really that part of the process where you're figuring out what idea you actually want to tell. What are you trying to say? And then how do we find a story representation for actually expressing that and telling that story? If we can figure that out, then we simply grow it. We populate it with the characters and the subplots and the themes and the story world, and all that kind of stuff goes into the story development phase. Now, it's not going to dictate or determine the final outcome of your story. It's going to determine the story plan that you then sit down with and you actually blast out the words on the page. So that's the beginning, right? Starting with that idea, right? Well, that brings us to what I believe, what I figured out, what I discovered along the way is an even better place to start. Let me ask you this. What is the biggest difference between a novice writer, someone who knows nothing about screenwriting, and an advanced professional credited writer, someone who has been doing it for 20, 30 years? The difference is their knowledge base. The difference is what they already know and understand about the craft, about the production process, about the industry, about all the different realities of screenwriting. Now, the professional, when they start this process, when they try to find and develop those ideas in the first place, they're coming from a place of experience. They're coming from a place where they are what I call pre-aligned with the industry and its needs. If you wonder why the professional screenwriters who have tons of credits continue to work again and again, even if maybe their films weren't huge hits or whatever it might be, it's because they have this wealth of experience that they bring to the process. So they're already creating stories that are more in sync with the producer's needs. So what I realized was, if you have a novice writer, you have someone who's completely new to the process, or even an intermediate writer who's not new to screenwriting, but actually it doesn't have the full picture of everything, wouldn't it be better if before we started the story development process, we actually pre-aligned their imagination with their target needs? Now, the way I focus on this in my system is I focus on pre-aligning with a producer's needs. But ultimately, it could be anything. It could be you want to write for a specific filmmaker, for example. If you get to know what their stories are like and what the movies that they make are like, you can watch a bunch of those movies, get it sort of in your head, sort of understand their way of thinking, their sense of humor, whatever it might be. And then when you create, you're actually tapping into your creative instincts, your unique perspective, your window on the world, as it were, right? You're tapping into what's unique and special about you and your imagination, but you're creating in a way that is pre-aligned with the kind of thing that they would want. So you're not writing for them. You're not trying to figure out what's going to make them happy. You're trying to figure out what's going to make you happy, but because it's already there, your creative subconscious is working on it, you're naturally going to create things that are more in sync with your target. Another way to look at it, if you imagine writing a novel, right? You're a novelist. A novelist would not obviously pre-align with a producer. They might pre-align with a book publisher, with Random House or something like that, right? So they would try to figure out what kinds of things what kinds of things Random House might want, or the kinds of things that the publishing industry is looking for at this point in time. They'd do some research, they'd study, they'd figure out sort of the lay of the land, and then with that knowledge in the creative subconscious, they then go in and start to develop their story. They start to find the idea, grow it into the story, the expression of it, the characters and the conflict and all that stuff. So if we really think about what is involved in pre-aligning your imagination, what you need to have an understanding of is how the industry works, who's who, what's what's sort of the general lay of the land, what a screenplay is for, why we write screenplays, why you should turn your idea into one. But even prior to that, what I have found is that particularly newer writers, at the very, very beginning of the process, really need to understand writing itself. You need to understand what writing is about. You need to develop the habit of consistent, ongoing daily action. If new writers, particularly writers who don't have any experience in it, they have an idea pops into their head. The first thing they do is they Google script formatting software, because they think if you just format the story correctly on the page, then off you go. You've written a screenplay. Let me dispel any notion. If you write a story that is not a screenplay, but you do it in script format, we can tell. We can spot it instantly. We know what a screenplay is and what it's not, how they're written, what they look like. Not just from a formatting standpoint, but from how the information plays, what the visuals are that you're putting on the page, whether this is actually something that a producer could do something with or not. So a brand new writer would have to start at the very beginning, right? They'd have to understand how creativity works, the basic ideas of story, the basic ideas of how to break down the process and actually go through that process. So in some ways, this show here is kind of trying to be a little bit of that framework building for you. I can't build the full framework for you in this show because there's a lot to it, and understanding how to build that knowledge is a little bit beyond the scope of this show. But if you understand what the basic needs of a writer at the very, very beginning of the process is, you have to build the foundation for the project that you're then subsequently going to create. If you just, idea pops into your head and you start going, it's very stream of consciousness. It's not that you can't get there that way. It's that if you do that, you're, in my opinion, wasting a whole lot of time, because you're going to go off in lots of different directions that might be fun and exploratory, and as an exercise, go for it. I'm not in any way telling anybody not to do that. But what I'm saying is if you go in all these different directions without that grounding, without that framework, then you're going to find that the pieces will fall apart later on down the road. It's when writers get into problems in the rewrite process, the rewrite stage of the process. It's almost always because they either don't understand the process yet fully, or they have not laid those foundations solidly at the beginning. So if we then take a look at sort of these 7 phases of the process, the very first is to prepare and pre-align your imagination with industry needs, or with your target of what you're actually creating for. So that way you go into the story development phase, where you find and develop this idea, you grow it organically into a story, you create your story roadmap. With that roadmap, you go into the writing phase. You blast out that first draft, you tap into the magic, you capture it on the page. With that, you go through this 6-level rewrite process so that you refine and refine and refine and refine your project until it's literally the story you wanted to tell. Once it's the story you wanted to tell, you step back and you make sure that the words that you've created on the page are going to actually give the reader the experience of the story that you've created. Remember, screenplays are literally cinema on the page. When you read the screenplay, you should be able to picture, the reader should be able to picture in their mind the movie as it's unfolding on the screen. It's not about going into the character's mind or backstory or showing things that are off screen. It's what we see and what we hear on the screen, right? So that, when someone reads that, it has to hook them, it has to pull them in, they have to be able to see that movie. If they see that movie, then they're going to be ready to give you notes and feedback that address the things they loved and didn't love about the movie. And that's how you can determine whether your project actually aligns, whether it's going to connect or not with your target. At that point, you'll know exactly how it is, what it is, the kind of person that it's going to connect with, particularly if you pre-aligned your imagination in the first place. And then finding and connecting with that producer becomes a whole layer easier. It doesn't mean it's easy. It makes it a whole layer easier because you've actually created something extraordinary that's in sync with their immediate needs, that your creative subconscious is helping you with at every step along the way. So if we go back to the very first phase of this process, it's a little bit like what we talked about in the beginning episodes of this series. It's about understanding where you're going. It's about knowing what your target actually is. If you know what the overall goal is, and then you go, right, off I go. I'm reaching for that thing. If that's your approach, what's going to happen is if you don't have enough of a framework, if you don't have enough supporting knowledge and information and experience and skills to actually get there, you can very easily go way off the mark to even the point of finding your story idea. So, for example, if you wanted to write, let's say, a horror film, let's just use that as an example, and horror is not really your thing, but you think, more people buy horror than other genres or whatever, so you're like, well, I'm going to write a horror film. But if horror is not your thing, then you have that idea. You could, if you don't pre-align your imagination, if you don't prepare, if you don't get your creative subconscious in sync with your ultimate goal before you begin, when you go through the process of finding your story and growing your story out and developing your story, you may end up coming up with very cliche story ideas, stuff that's already been done before, stuff that's kind of out of date, stuff that no producer could actually say yes to, no horror producer could actually say yes to, because they don't make that kind of stuff anymore. That's not good. We've seen this. We've done that. It's the same old, same old. Show me something new. Show me something interesting. You have to, if you think about market research, for example, and you think about if you're actually going to write a horror film, shouldn't you get to know what's been made, how things have changed over the years, what the latest is, and sort of the trends and where we're going in horror storytelling? If you think of it from that perspective, then you start to think it's not about limiting my imagination or writing for a producer. It's really about shaping my imagination. It's pre-aligning my imagination so that my imagination can create those new, organic, original stories that are more in sync with the current needs of the market. Now, I'm not saying to write for the market. I'm trying to give you an example of, or a basic understanding of what pre-aligning your imagination is really all about. This is, in my opinion, this is a breakthrough discovery. Now, this is something that I only discovered through the process of reverse engineering this stuff. So when I first started teaching screenwriting, maybe 20 years ago now, I taught what most people teach. I went out and I taught all the structure, and I taught the 3 acts, and I taught the, characters and dialogue and plots and theme and all that kind of stuff, which I still do. It's all woven right into what I'm about. But what I realized when I realized along the way, as I spoke about it in an earlier video, what I realized if you go through that process and you create something extraordinary, the thing that's going to possibly still get you no's everywhere is that it's not aligned with its potential target. So that was my breakthrough discovery, the idea of alignment. So taking it to the next level, if we take that idea of alignment and we pre-align your imagination at the beginning of the process, then the things that you create that are uniquely you, that come from your unique experience and imagination, those things are already more likely to be in sync with your target. So if we pre-align your imagination effectively, then the things that you create are more likely to sell. They're more likely to get a yes. They're more like, if you take the time to pre-align your own imagination before you begin the story development process, you are more likely to succeed. It's that simple. Most writers will not do this work. Most writers will not have the patience to do this because they want to jump right into their story. It's all about the idea that they've got in their head, and it's all about capturing that idea, which is fine, which is good. If it's an exercise, if it's a hobby, go for it. If you actually want to write something that gets turned into a movie, and let's remember, screenplays only exist to be turned into a movie. That's what they're for. That's what they're about. If you're writing it as a hobby because it's fun and you like it, cool. If it's a creative expression and outlet for you, fantastic. Do what you're going to do. It's all good. But ultimately, if you're writing a screenplay, in theory, you're writing it to be turned into a movie. So if you're creating something that can't get turned into a movie, or if you're not taking the time to pre-align your imagination so that what you create can more likely get turned into a movie, in my opinion, you're probably wasting a little time, because that time could be better spent. You could still hobbyize the thing. You could still use it as a writing exercise, using it as a writing exercise in this direction. So ultimately, what's the point of all this? The point of all this is that whatever idea you have in your head right now, that idea can be turned into something. I know this from experience. I've seen writers of all levels. I have seen writers that I thought would never get there, and I have seen writers that I thought were surely going to get there that didn't. I have seen all the variations of this, and I can tell you that if you're doubting yourself, or you're wondering if this is possible, or if this is doable, or whatever, first of all, stick around for this show. I'm going to show you that it's possible. I'm going to show you that it's doable. I'm going to show you how to do things. But ultimately, if you have that idea, it's really about taking it through that process. If you have been writing for any length of time and you have not succeeded, the number one reason you have not succeeded is you have not gone through the entire process. This is 100% true. There are people who have been writing for years, and their writing's great, and they've sent things out, and they've won competitions and whatever. There is some part of this process that they are not doing, or that they haven't done effectively enough, or that they're not really fully understanding in order to get right into the little details and make it happen. You can do this. I know you can do this. I want to show you how to do this. So if you have any questions about this phase of the process, what I call the setup phase, and notice there's the setup phase, and then at the end there's the payoff phase, because I believe the setup payoff dynamic, which we'll talk about in another video, or you can check out on this channel, there's already a nice little 4-part series about it. The setup payoff dynamic is literally the engine that drives all storytelling. Forget the 3-act structure, don't forget it, but The setup payoff dynamic is what underpins the 3-act structure. So the setup to prepare yourself, go through this process, and then you pay off at the end. So you need to know how the setup and the payoff are connected with one another. So we're going to talk about a lot more of that kind of stuff as we go along through this series. But hopefully you're getting a picture of what the whole thing is all about. Tomorrow, I'm going to tie some things together. I'm going to hopefully try to show you how to actually implement, how to actually use some of this stuff. But if you have any questions, please pop them into the comments. If you disagree with anything, or you just want to send hate my way, pop it in the comments as well. If you're a lurker and you're watching and you're not clicking the like button and you're not sending any comments, please write something so I have an idea of how you feel about it. I want to know how you feel, so that if there's any problem or discrepancy or something we're not covering, or something there's a gap there, let me know what that is so that I can address it and help you get where you're trying to go. Now, let's pull it back and let's turn it into a daily prompt for today, because I think we're a little over time here. So today's daily prompt is simply this. Think about this idea of pre-alignment. Imagine where you're going. You did that in the exercise in one of the first episodes of the series. If you're already writing, or you're going through this process with other projects, whatever it might be, if you do have some idea of where you're trying to get. So what could you do at the very beginning to pre-align your imagination so that when you begin developing your story, it is going to be more likely to be in sync. What you create naturally and organically is more likely to be in sync with your ultimate target. That's today's daily prompt. Hopefully that makes sense. Any questions, let me know. Oftentimes I'll do these things. I'll put the prompt out there. I'm not sure if it's clear. If you have any questions, let me know. If you're not sure, look at the comments and read the comments that I'm making, because you might be able to find a little hint or two, or even some new insight that we didn't cover in the actual video. So that's today's daily prompt. Please, 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 for the love of all that is good, take action. Please don't just watch this stuff and listen to it and let it go in one ear and out the other, or feel better that you have new knowledge and you feel strong, but you don't actually do anything. It's the implementing of it that makes it work. So please, whether it's 10 minutes, whether it's 1 hour, whether it's, if you have 10 hours today to spend on it, whatever you can do, even 10 minutes, even just 10 minutes, take action today so that you can keep moving forward towards your goal. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, let me know, and we'll see you tomorrow.